You know, there are moments in life when trust becomes our greatest vulnerability. I learned this lesson the hard way on what should have been my special day. It was early morning on my birthday when my phone rang with that familiar tone that would change everything. The voice on the other end belonged to someone I considered not just a colleague, but a friend. Someone I had built a professional relationship with over months of shared projects and mutual respect. His words came rushed, almost desperate, as he explained an unexpected emergency that required my immediate help. Without hesitation, I found myself saying yes, believing that loyalty and dedication would somehow be recognized and valued in our professional environment. The request seemed reasonable at first. Cover his shift, handle his responsibilities, be the reliable person he could count on. As I listened to his explanation, I felt that familiar warmth of being needed, of being the one someone turns to in times of crisis. This wasn't just about work. It was about proving my worth, demonstrating the kind of team player I had always strived to be. I had plans for my birthday, small but meaningful celebrations that I had looked forward to. Yet I pushed them aside without a second thought. The irony wasn't lost on me, that on the day meant to celebrate my existence, I was choosing to make myself invisible for someone else's benefit. But that's what good people do, right? We sacrifice our own comfort for the greater good, believing that such gestures build the foundation of lasting professional relationships. What I didn't realize then was that I was setting a precedent that would haunt me for months to come. Every time I said yes to covering for him, every extra hour I worked, every personal sacrifice I made was being catalogued not as dedication, but as availability. The professional environment I thought was built on mutual respect was actually a complex web of power dynamics, where some people's time was valued more than others. My birthday became just another day when I proved I could be counted on, when my personal life could be pushed aside for the sake of the team. But as I would soon discover, not everyone in that environment was willing to make the same sacrifices, and my willingness to help would become both my greatest strength and my most exploited weakness. The morning I received that call, I remember looking at myself in the mirror before heading out. There was something in my eyes, a mixture of pride and anticipation. I was proud to be reliable, to be the person someone could call in their moment of need. The anticipation came from believing that such gestures of loyalty would be remembered, that they would build a foundation of trust that would benefit both of us in the long run. I adjusted my clothes, grabbed my keys, and headed to work with a sense of purpose that felt almost noble. The professional environment I was walking into seemed full of possibilities, where hard work and dedication were the currencies of success. Little did I know that I was about to learn one of life's harshest lessons about the difference between being valued and being used. The office felt different that day, or maybe it was just my perception changing. As I settled into covering his responsibilities, I found myself hoping for some acknowledgement, not grand gestures, but simple recognition of the sacrifice I was making. A thank you text, a brief acknowledgement of what covering for him meant, especially on my birthday. The hours ticked by slowly, and with each passing moment, I felt the weight of my decision more acutely. The frustration wasn't just about missing my personal celebrations. It was about the growing realization that my gesture might not carry the meaning I had attributed to it. The professional environment I had trusted to reward dedication was starting to reveal its true nature, one where some people's contributions were noticed while others remained invisible. As the day progressed, I began to understand that there's a dangerous trap in being the person everyone can count on. While reliability is admirable, it can also become a prison when others start taking it for granted. The trust I had invested in this relationship was beginning to feel one-sided, and the confidence I had in our professional dynamic was slowly eroding. My birthday had become a symbol of something larger, the way loyalty can be exploited when it's not reciprocated. The environment I thought valued dedication was actually rewarding those who knew how to leverage others' goodwill. But perhaps the most painful realization was that my willingness to help had made me predictable. And in a professional environment, predictability without recognition is often the first step toward being overlooked. By the end of that day, I had completed all his tasks while managing my own responsibilities. The learning from this experience was just beginning to take shape in my mind. I had given my birthday to someone who I believed would value the gesture, but the silence that followed told a different story. The professional environment I had navigated with such trust was teaching me that good intentions don't always lead to good outcomes. My dedication had been noted, but not in the way I had hoped. Instead of building a stronger foundation of mutual respect, I had unknowingly established myself as someone whose personal time and special moments could be easily disrupted. The superaction I thought I was taking, being the reliable colleague, was actually setting me up for a pattern of being taken for granted that would define our relationship moving forward. There's something particularly insidious about workplace hostility that comes wrapped in smiles and pleasantries. From the moment she joined our team, I sensed an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't obvious at first. These things never are. Professional environments have their own subtle language of power plays and territorial behavior, and she was fluent in every nuance. Her arrival changed the dynamic in ways that were felt rather than seen, like a shift in atmospheric pressure before a storm. I tried to approach her with the same openness I extended to all new colleagues, believing that professional courtesy and genuine kindness would eventually win over any initial reservations. But what I interpreted as adjustment period behavior was actually the beginning of a systematic campaign to undermine my position and confidence within the team. The comments started small, almost unnoticeable if you weren't paying attention. A raised eyebrow here, a subtle correction there, always delivered with that practiced smile that made questioning her motives seem unreasonable. She had mastered the art of disguised criticism, wrapping insults in concern and diminishment in helpful observations. When she commented on my presentation style, it was framed as constructive feedback. When she questioned my decisions, it was positioned as collaborative discussion. The professional environment I had always found supportive suddenly felt like a minefield, where every interaction required careful navigation. Her words carried just enough plausible deniability to make any complaint seem petty, yet they accumulated like small cuts that eventually created a much larger wound to my confidence in standing within the team. What struck me most was how she seemed to have an innate understanding of professional politics that I had never fully grasped. While I focused on doing good work and building genuine relationships, she was playing a different game entirely. The trust I placed in straightforward communication and honest collaboration was being systematically exploited by someone who understood that perception often matters more than reality in professional environments. Her ability to diminish my contributions while appearing supportive was almost artistic in its execution. She would agree with my ideas in private conversations, then present slightly modified versions as her own insights in team meetings. The loyalty I showed to collaborative principles was being used against me by someone who saw every interaction as an opportunity to advance her own position at my expense. The exclusion began gradually, so subtly that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. Conversations would pause when I approached, resume when I left. Meeting invitations that should have included me somehow didn't reach my inbox. Important decisions were being made in informal gatherings where my presence was somehow unnecessary. The professional environment I had always navigated with confidence was becoming increasingly foreign to me. She had a talent for making her hostility seem like natural team dynamics, positioning herself as the insider while casting me as the outsider. The frustration wasn't just about being left out. It was about watching someone systematically dismantle relationships I had spent months building, all while maintaining the facade of professional courtesy and team spirit. Her passive-aggressive tactics were particularly devastating because they were so difficult to address directly. How do you complain about someone who never says anything explicitly wrong? How do you report behavior that always has plausible alternative explanations? The professional environment I had always trusted to value fairness and direct communication was proving inadequate for dealing with someone who operated in the gray areas of interpersonal manipulation. Every attempt I made to address the situation directly was met with confused innocence, as if I were imagining problems that didn't exist. The confidence I had always maintained in professional settings was being slowly eroded by someone who understood that reputation could be damaged through 1,000 small actions rather than one dramatic confrontation. The most painful aspect was watching my own reputation suffer, while hers seemed to flourish. Colleagues who had once sought my input began turning to her instead. Projects I had initiated were being reassigned or restructured in ways that minimized my involvement. The professional environment I had always found rewarding was becoming a source of daily stress and self-doubt. Her strategy was working not through any single devastating blow, but through consistent undermining that gradually shifted the team's perception of my value and competence. The learning I was gaining about workplace dynamics was coming at the cost of my professional standing and personal well-being. The trust I had invested in believing that good work speaks for itself was being challenged by someone who understood that controlling the narrative is often more powerful than controlling the facts. By this point, I was beginning to understand that some people enter professional environments not to contribute to collective success, but to establish dominance and control. Her diminishment of my contributions wasn't personal, it was strategic. She had identified me as competition, and had systematically set about neutralizing that competition through methods that were both subtle and devastatingly effective. The professional environment I had always navigated with integrity was being revealed as a space where different rules applied to different people. My dedication to honest collaboration was being exploited by someone who saw every relationship as transactional and every interaction as an opportunity to gain advantage. The frustration and disappointment I felt were teaching me valuable lessons about the difference between playing fair and playing to win. Lessons that would soon become even more relevant as the situation continued to evolve. 3 days after sacrificing my birthday for what I believed was friendship and professional solidarity, I found myself sitting in a team meeting that would shatter my remaining illusions about workplace loyalty. The irony of timing wasn't lost on me. Just 72 hours after covering his responsibilities without question, I was about to witness the true nature of the professional environment I had served so faithfully. He stood at the front of the room with the confidence of someone who had never questioned his own value or worried about recognition. His words came easily, flowing with the kind of authority that comes from knowing your voice will be heard and respected. As he began to speak about team contributions and outstanding performance, I felt a flutter of anticipation, a small hope that perhaps my recent gesture would be acknowledged, that my dedication would finally receive the recognition it deserved. The praise began flowing, but not in the direction I had expected. Instead of acknowledging the person who had sacrificed personal time and special moments for the team's benefit, he was highlighting someone whose contributions had been anything but supportive. His words painted a picture of proactivity and team spirit that bore no resemblance to the reality I had experienced. He spoke of initiative and leadership, describing scenarios where I distinctly remembered taking the lead while she had remained passive or even resistant. The professional environment I had trusted to value truth and fairness was revealing itself to be a place where perception mattered more than reality, where the ability to position oneself favorably was more valuable than actual contribution. The confidence I had maintained in the system's ability to recognize genuine effort was crumbling with each word of misplaced praise. What struck me most powerfully was the selective nature of his memory and observation. The same person who had called me in desperation just days earlier was now blind to my contributions, while celebrating someone whose primary skill seemed to be self-promotion. The trust I had placed in his ability to see and value dedication was being systematically dismantled by his public endorsement of behavior that had made my work life increasingly difficult. His praise wasn't just misplaced, it was actively harmful, legitimizing the very tactics that had been used to undermine my position. The professional environment I had always believed rewarded merit was showing me that sometimes the biggest rewards go to those who best understand the politics of perception, rather than the reality of contribution. Sitting in that meeting, I felt something shift inside me, a fundamental change in how I understood my place in this professional environment. The loyalty I had shown, the extra hours I had worked, the personal sacrifices I had made. None of it seemed to register in his assessment of team performance. Instead, he was celebrating someone whose main achievement appeared to be making herself visible while making others invisible. The frustration I felt wasn't just about being overlooked. It was about watching manipulation being rewarded while genuine dedication was ignored. The learning I was gaining about workplace dynamics was painful, but necessary. I was discovering that being good at your job and being recognized for your job were two entirely different skills, and I had been focusing on the wrong one. The most devastating aspect of his praise was how it revealed the true nature of our professional relationship. I had believed that my reliability and dedication had created a foundation of mutual respect and recognition. Instead, I was discovering that I had been categorized as someone whose contributions could be taken for granted, while others received credit for far less significant efforts. The professional environment I had navigated with such trust was teaching me that consistency can become invisibility, that being dependable can make you dispensable in the eyes of those who measure value by visibility rather than substance. The disappointment I felt was profound, not just because I wasn't recognized, but because I realized how fundamentally I had misunderstood the system I was operating within. His words continued to flow, each sentence deepening my understanding of how thoroughly I had misjudged the situation. The person he was praising had never covered anyone's shift, never sacrificed personal time for team benefit, never demonstrated the kind of selfless dedication that I had considered essential to professional success. Yet here she was, being celebrated for qualities that existed more in perception than in reality. The professional environment I had always trusted to reward genuine contribution was showing me that sometimes the most successful people are those who understand that managing up is more important than managing workload. The confidence I had maintained in my approach to professional relationships was being challenged by the realization that authenticity and strategy were often at odds in workplace settings. As the meeting concluded and the praise settled into the record of team achievements, I found myself grappling with a new understanding of professional dynamics. The dedication I had shown was being overshadowed by someone else's ability to position themselves strategically within the team's hierarchy. The trust I had placed in merit-based recognition was being replaced by a more complex understanding of how success is actually measured and rewarded in professional environments. The learning I was gaining was bitter but valuable. I was discovering that being good at your job is just the beginning. That success often depends more on being seen as good at your job than on actual performance. The frustration and disappointment I felt were teaching me that professional environments operate on multiple levels simultaneously, and I had been playing by rules that didn't fully account for the political realities of workplace dynamics. The public praise had an immediate and devastating effect on the already fragile balance of our professional environment. Like gasoline thrown on smoldering embers, his words ignited something in her that transformed subtle hostility into brazen disregard for professional courtesy. The validation she had received seemed to confirm what she had always believed, that she could operate with impunity while I remained powerless to challenge her behavior. The confidence she gained from his endorsement was palpable, manifesting in increasingly bold attempts to undermine my position and contributions. What had once been disguised as collaborative feedback now became open dismissal of my ideas and expertise. The professional environment I had always trusted to maintain basic standards of respect was revealing itself to be a space where power dynamics trumped professional courtesy, where public endorsement could be weaponized to justify increasingly aggressive behavior. The systematic redistribution of my responsibilities began almost immediately after that meeting. Projects I had initiated and developed were quietly reassigned without explanation or consultation. The trust I had placed in the stability of professional roles and responsibilities was being systematically dismantled by someone who now felt empowered to claim territory that had never been hers. When I questioned these changes, I was met with vague explanations about team efficiency and better resource allocation, corporate speak that masked what was essentially a hostile takeover of my professional domain. The loyalty I had shown to collaborative principles was being exploited by someone who understood that possession is 9/10 of the law in professional environments. The frustration I felt wasn't just about losing projects. It was about watching my professional identity being erased one responsibility at a time. What made this period particularly painful was the way my increased efforts seemed to make me even more invisible. The harder I worked, the less recognition I received. Extra hours became expected rather than appreciated, and my attempts to maintain quality standards were dismissed as unnecessary perfectionism. The professional environment I had always understood to reward dedication was teaching me that sometimes working harder can actually diminish your value if others perceive your efforts as desperation rather than excellence. The confidence I had maintained in the relationship between effort and recognition was being systematically challenged by a system that seemed to reward those who knew how to manage perceptions rather than those who managed actual work. The learning I was gaining about workplace dynamics was harsh, but necessary. I was discovering that visibility and value were not synonymous, and that sometimes the most hard-working people become the most taken for granted. His continued ignorance of the situation was perhaps the most frustrating aspect of this entire ordeal. When I attempted to address the redistribution of responsibilities and the increasingly hostile work environment, he minimized my concerns with dismissive explanations about team dynamics and personality conflicts. The trust I had placed in his ability to manage fairly and recognize genuine issues was being eroded by his apparent blindness to the systematic undermining of my position. His responses suggested that he saw my concerns as personal sensitivity rather than legitimate professional grievances. The professional environment I had always believed would provide recourse for unfair treatment was proving to be inadequate when the person responsible for fairness was either unable or unwilling to see the reality of the situation. The disappointment I felt was profound, not just because my concerns were dismissed, but because I realized how alone I was in navigating this increasingly hostile environment. The gaslighting aspect of his responses was particularly devastating to my sense of reality and professional judgment. When I presented specific examples of transferred responsibilities and excluded communications, he reframed them as natural team evolution and improved efficiency. The confidence I had maintained in my ability to accurately assess professional situations was being challenged by someone who seemed to have a completely different interpretation of the same events. His insistence that I was reading too much into obvious patterns of exclusion and diminishment made me question my own perceptions and professional instincts. The professional environment I had always trusted to validate reasonable concerns was teaching me that sometimes the most destructive responses are those that make you doubt your own experience rather than address the actual problems you're facing. The isolation I began to feel was perhaps the most damaging aspect of this entire situation. Not only was I losing professional ground, but I was also losing confidence in my ability to navigate workplace relationships and assess professional dynamics accurately. The support I had expected from leadership was replaced by subtle suggestions that I was the problem, too sensitive, too demanding, too focused on perceived slights rather than team success. The professional environment I had always found nurturing was becoming a source of daily stress and self-doubt. The learning I was gaining about power dynamics was coming at the cost of my professional well-being and mental health. The trust I had invested in believing that reasonable people could resolve reasonable conflicts was being replaced by the understanding that sometimes reasonable people see the same situation in completely incompatible ways. As this pattern of dismissal and redistribution continued, I began to understand that I was caught in a system that was fundamentally flawed in its approach to conflict resolution and fair treatment. The dedication I had shown was being used against me as evidence of my availability for whatever remained. After more desirable assignments were redistributed, the professional environment I had always navigated with integrity was revealing itself to be a space where different rules applied to different people, where some voices carried more weight regardless of the substance of their concerns. The frustration and disappointment I felt were teaching me valuable lessons about the difference between professional environments that talk about fairness and those that actually practice it. The superaction I thought I was taking, addressing problems directly and professionally, was actually highlighting my powerlessness within a system that had already decided my value and position. There comes a moment in every professional relationship when you realize that continuing to invest emotionally in a situation that consistently devalues your contributions is not dedication, it's self-destruction. The learning I had gained over the previous months was crystallizing into a painful but necessary truth. Some professional environments are not designed to nurture genuine talent and dedication, but to reward those who understand the unspoken rules of visibility and political maneuvering. The confidence I had once maintained in my ability to succeed through hard work and integrity was being replaced by a more complex understanding of how success is actually achieved and maintained in toxic workplace dynamics. The trust I had placed in the system's ability to recognize and reward genuine contribution was giving way to the realization that sometimes the most professional thing you can do is recognize when a situation is fundamentally incompatible with your values and well-being. The emotional withdrawal began as a protective mechanism, but it quickly evolved into something more strategic and purposeful. Instead of continuing to pour energy into relationships that consistently failed to reciprocate respect and recognition, I began to redirect my focus toward opportunities that might actually value what I had to offer. The professional environment I had once approached with enthusiasm and openness was now something I navigated with careful detachment, investing only what was absolutely necessary to maintain professional standards while protecting my emotional and mental resources. The loyalty I had once freely given was being replaced by a more calculated approach to professional relationships, one that demanded reciprocity and mutual respect, rather than accepting one-sided dedication as the norm. The frustration I had felt was transforming into a clearer understanding of my own worth and the kind of professional environment I deserved. This period of withdrawal was accompanied by a growing clarity about what I actually wanted from my professional life. The disappointment I had experienced was teaching me valuable lessons about the difference between being busy and being fulfilled, between being needed and being valued. The professional environment I had once accepted as normal was being revealed as dysfunctional when compared to healthier alternatives I was beginning to explore. The confidence I was rebuilding was based not on external validation, but on a clearer understanding of my own capabilities and professional standards. The learning I was gaining about workplace dynamics was helping me identify the red flags I had previously ignored or rationalized away. The trust I was developing was primarily in my own judgment and ability to recognize when a situation was worth my investment and when it was time to seek better opportunities. The search for new opportunities became both a practical necessity and a form of emotional healing. Each application I submitted and each interview I attended was a reminder that there were other professional environments where my skills and dedication might actually be recognized and valued. The professional environment I was preparing to leave had taught me valuable lessons about what to look for and what to avoid in future workplace relationships. The loyalty I had once given freely was being replaced by a more strategic approach to professional commitment, one that demanded evidence of mutual respect and genuine appreciation for contributions. The frustration I had experienced was being channeled into a clearer vision of the kind of professional environment I wanted to be part of, one where integrity and hard work were actually valued rather than just discussed in theory. The formal request for transfer was both a practical step and a symbolic gesture of self-respect. By taking concrete action to remove myself from a toxic situation, I was demonstrating that I valued my own well-being and professional growth more than I valued maintaining the status quo. The professional environment I was leaving behind had taught me that sometimes the most professional thing you can do is recognize when you're not being treated professionally. The confidence I was rebuilding was based on the understanding that my worth was not determined by one toxic workplace or one set of dysfunctional professional relationships. The learning I was gaining about my own resilience and ability to make difficult decisions was perhaps more valuable than any recognition I might have received from staying in a situation that consistently undervalued my contributions. The process of disengaging from toxic professional relationships was more complex than I had anticipated. It required not just physical separation, but emotional and psychological work to undo the damage that had been done to my confidence and professional self-image. The professional environment I was leaving had affected not just my immediate work experience, but my broader understanding of professional relationships and workplace dynamics. The trust I was rebuilding had to be carefully balanced, maintaining enough openness to form new professional relationships while protecting myself from the kind of exploitation I had experienced. The frustration I had felt was being transformed into wisdom about the importance of setting boundaries and maintaining professional standards that protected both my work quality and my personal well-being. As I prepared for this transition, I found myself reflecting on the entire experience with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. The disappointment I had experienced was teaching me invaluable lessons about resilience, self-advocacy, and the importance of professional environments that align with personal values. The professional environment I was leaving had been toxic, but it had also been educational in ways that healthier environments might not have been. The confidence I was rebuilding was stronger and more realistic than what I had started with, tempered by experience but not diminished by it. The learning I was taking from this experience would serve me well in future professional relationships, helping me to identify and avoid similar situations while also appreciating genuinely supportive professional environments when I encountered them. The superaction I was taking, choosing to leave rather than continue accepting unacceptable treatment, was perhaps the most professional and self-respecting decision I had made throughout this entire ordeal. Sometimes the most profound education comes not from success, but from surviving situations that test every assumption you held about professional relationships and workplace fairness. The experience I had endured became a masterclass in understanding the complex dynamics that govern professional environments, teaching me lessons that no business school curriculum could have provided. The confidence I rebuilt after this ordeal was fundamentally different from what I had started with. It was grounded in experience, rather than optimism, tempered by reality rather than shaped by idealistic expectations. The trust I learned to place in my own judgment became the foundation for every subsequent professional relationship I would build. What began as a painful lesson in workplace betrayal evolved into invaluable wisdom about recognizing my own worth, setting appropriate boundaries, and choosing professional environments that aligned with my values and standards. The process of learning to value my own contributions, independent of external recognition, was perhaps the most transformative aspect of this entire experience. For too long, I had allowed others to define my professional worth, measuring my success by their acknowledgement, rather than by my actual achievements and capabilities. The professional environment I had left behind had taught me that external validation, while nice to receive, could never be the primary source of professional confidence and self-worth. The loyalty I now gave to my own standards and values became more important than any loyalty I might feel towards specific individuals or organizations. The frustration I had experienced with being undervalued was transformed into a clear understanding of how to communicate my worth and contributions in ways that commanded respect, rather than simply hoping for recognition. Establishing boundaries became both an art and a science that I had to learn through deliberate practice and conscious effort. The professional environment I now navigated required a completely different approach, one that balanced openness and collaboration with self-protection and strategic thinking. The confidence I developed in setting limits on what I would and wouldn't accept in professional relationships became a cornerstone of my career satisfaction and success. The learning I gained about the difference between being helpful and being exploited helped me maintain my natural inclination toward collaboration, while protecting myself from those who might take advantage of that generosity. The trust I placed in my own instincts about when boundaries were being crossed became one of my most valuable professional skills, helping me maintain healthy relationships while avoiding the pitfalls that had previously caused me so much pain. The search for a new professional environment became an exercise in applying everything I had learned about workplace dynamics and professional relationships. Instead of simply looking for any opportunity, I was now evaluating potential employers based on their demonstrated commitment to fairness, recognition, and genuine professional development. The professional environment I eventually chose was one where my questions about team dynamics and recognition systems were welcomed rather than dismissed, where examples of how they handled conflict and supported team members were readily provided rather than vaguely deflected. The loyalty I was willing to offer was now contingent on evidence of mutual respect and appreciation, rather than being freely given based on hope and good intentions. The frustration I had experienced in my previous role had taught me exactly what questions to ask and what warning signs to watch for in new professional relationships. The transformation from victim to victor wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was a gradual process of rebuilding confidence, refining professional standards, and learning to trust my own judgment about workplace dynamics. The professional environment I found myself in after making this transition was a revelation in how different things could be when respect and recognition were genuine rather than performative. The confidence I developed in my new role was built on actual appreciation for my contributions, rather than hope that they might eventually be noticed. The learning I continued to gain about effective professional relationships was now happening in an environment that supported growth rather than undermined it. The trust I was able to place in my new colleagues and leadership was possible because they had demonstrated through actions, not just words, that they valued what I brought to the team. Perhaps the most valuable lesson I learned was that professional environments reveal who people really are when they think the stakes are low enough that courtesy and fairness become optional. The disappointment I had experienced with discovering the true character of people I had trusted taught me to pay attention to how individuals treat those who have less power or influence, rather than focusing only on how they interact with peers and superiors. The professional environment I now thrived in was characterized by consistent respect across all levels of hierarchy and interaction, where kindness and professionalism weren't dependent on someone's ability to advance your career or make your life difficult. The loyalty I witnessed and participated in was mutual and genuine, based on shared values and respect rather than convenience and strategic positioning. The superaction that emerged from this entire experience was the development of what I call professional wisdom, the ability to quickly assess workplace dynamics, recognize healthy versus toxic patterns, and make decisions that protected both my immediate well-being and long-term career satisfaction. The professional environment I had survived and left behind had been an unwitting teacher, showing me exactly what I didn't want in my career, while clarifying what I absolutely required. The confidence I now maintained was unshakable, because it was based on knowledge rather than naive trust, on experience rather than wishful thinking. The learning I continued to pursue was now focused on growth and contribution, rather than simply avoiding pain and disappointment. The trust I offered was selective and earned, but when it was given, it was backed by the wisdom to recognize whether it was being reciprocated and valued appropriately.